What we're going to do in this demo is work from SQL Developer. Remember, SQL Developer comes standard with Oracle Database 12c, and on your administrative workstation you can download and install SQL Developer as a standalone program. It does require the Java runtime environment. Or if you install the honest-to-goodness Oracle Database client and choose the administrator option, you'll get it then. So this is my session. You see I'm already hard at work. When the tool opens initially, this is what you see, the start page. And over on the left you have persistent connections. Of course, you're going to have no connections to start with. I have a few that I've pre-created. To create a connection, you just click the new connection button and fill out this box. Basically, you choose a friendly name, call it sales, or sometimes you could do user and then the name of the database. You can specify credentials, obviously. If you want to save the password, you can. You can color code the connection. For connection, it's up to you on how you want to do this. The basic is where you have to manually specify the host name of the server, the port, and the SID. But here's a cool shortcut. You can use TNS if you have the client software on your box, and then it'll go right into your TNS name Zora file, and you can select the appropriate service name. You can hit test. You want to see a status of success, and then eventually you can connect your session up. Okay? Now once you have your connection set up, like I've connected as a user named Sales, and in particular I'm looking at, or connected to I should say, my PlugDB database. That's a pluggable Oracle 12c database that was empty. I've been playing around, as you can see here. The SQL Developer tool is fantastic for learning. Notice that you can look graphically at all of your schema objects. Now it's going to show you only what you have permission to. See, it says tables filtered. And I had been messing around so I can select these. These are tables I was playing around with, and just look at the incredible amount of information that SQL Developer gives you. The column list, where you can see the names, the data types, data in the table if there's any, constraints that have been defined. It's pretty nuts the way this works. You can kind of get lost in SQL Developer at first because there's so much to look at. I think it's a fantastic tool, and I hope you agree. I have another session open for my system user, my super user, and just to set the stage for our work in creating tables, we can go ahead and create a table space. Now check this out in line 4. Create table space with just the name. And when you select a line like I did with the mouse, you can use this button up here to run the statement. If it's your first time running a statement on a page, it asks you for your connection. I'm going to run this as system in the context of the pluggable database. And it created it. Now you notice in the previous module we talked about all those different parameters you can have for table spaces. I'm just applying the name here and letting Oracle Managed Files take care of everything else. Isn't that great? So then as an administrator I can query the DBA, remember the system views, DBA data files. I'm just going to grab some specific columns from that view. And I just wanted to quickly come in here and show you that we now have a user data 2 table space, and look at its path. eApp Oracle, Aura Plug Data, ConDB, and then it just gets really wacky. When you're doing Oracle Managed Files, remember you set that as an initialization parameter, the DB create file dest, and then OMF takes care of all the rest. So the idea is that you can just use friendly object names, and under the hood everything else is taken care of for you. Otherwise you'd have to specify the path. Enough of the review. Now that we've created a table space, we can switch over to our sales user and let's start working with tables, shall we? The first query we'll run on line 1, we'll select count from user underscore tables, and I'll verify that I'm using my sales connection here. And I have 4 right now, and of course that's no surprise because you see them over here. This is the create table statement, friends, and there's a lot to it, and remember, in our scope, it's assumed that you have a basic understanding of SQL, so I don't have the time to discuss every one of these options, but as you see, I have a number of different columns, and I'm specifying a data type for each one. The main data types in Oracle are varchar, which is your variable length alphanumeric data. You specify varchar2, and then in parentheses, the maximum number of characters that you want in that column. There's a related data type called char. That's a fixed width column, but that's officially deprecated in Oracle, so I would suggest you stay away from it. You use varchar for most everything. Number is the next major data type. The difference between varchar and number, there's additional CPU required for numbers because we're assuming we're going to do some calculations at some point. So when you specify number, you add what's called precision and scale. So 5,2 means we can support numbers up to 5 digits in length. The second piece, scale, means how many characters are allowed after the decimal point, you see. So 5 comma 2, this would be a valid option here, 234.56. We also could do no decimal points and do 5 characters. That would be a valid price. What would not be valid is something like this, 12.345, because remember, we're controlling precision and scale. You could just add precision if you know you're not going to need decimals. The create table statement is create table, table name, and then between parentheses you add your columns. Like I've been saying, the columns consist of the name, the data type, and then you can add additional constraints if you want to in line. So as you see, my prod ID is going to be my primary key, and then product name is varchar, product category is varchar, price I'm going to do calculations on, so that's numeric, SKU is varchar, and then also if you want to, after your last column is where you define your table options. The constraint keyword is to create things like a check constraint. You see here I'm creating a constraint called check price, and what that does is it checks that the price is greater than 0. It's going to raise an error. Oracle will raise an error if it's not. And you can also specify the target table space, the one we just created, for instance, you see? Let me get rid of that one, make sure I don't have an object with this name. It might not like the constraint because that should already be defined, so I'm going to change that to check price too. We'll select those lines and run. Now, look here, sure enough, we're getting some errors. Some SQL errors and some Aura errors. This is important. When you run into Aura errors, just hit up Google and you can get help in many cases. There, I made sure that the constraint is unique, ran it again, and it said table products created. Good deal. Now, remember that DDL, data definition, involves create, alter, and delete. If we wanted to delete the table, we could simply run drop. I don't want to though. Select is what we use to retrieve rows. I'm going to have to fix the name here of the table, of course. Nothing there yet. So we can turn to DML, data manipulation language, and use insert to insert new data into that table. The syntax there is insert into table name, then values, and then you pass in your values. You have to know the columns and the order. It's doing it by hand here. That doing it meaning inserting data into a table is not very fun, unfortunately. And also, I make a comment here that sequences are a good idea for primary key columns. You can actually have Oracle auto-increment for each row, so you don't have to remember to choose a unique value for your first column, which is product ID in this case. So I'm saying in these lines, 17 and 18, product ID 1, name is foo, category is C1, price is $9.99, and the SKU is 12345. Here's a beginner mistake. Make sure to put quotation marks. I use single quotations around your varchars or you'll get an error. Select these lines, one row inserted. So now if we select from that products table, we see that data. Pretty cool. Now what if we violate one of the integrity constraints? Notice here the 0. We have a check constraint that's making sure that our salary data, or our price data I guess it is not 0. So if we try to add that, not to mention the table name is messed up. Let me fix that. Select the lines and run again. It tells us that we have a check constraint that's violated. And what's cool about these errors in SQL Developer, is that it gives us a nice report of the error. Not only the specific error with the Aura ID, but there's a cause and action field. Isn't that cool? Very helpful. Now indexes, like I said earlier, are a way to speed access in a table. It simply creates a tree. In fact, let me show you really quickly.